Hi, everyone. I don't think I have much to add. I mean, that's a lot already. I don't want to like burden you with like all those things about myself. I will mostly talk about projects, but if I had to add one little details that I'm not, I mean, I started working in the game design industry and slowly drifted, but I got back to it with one of the projects that I'm going to show you today, and not about video games, but about role-playing games. So, well, obviously, thank you, Felipe, Eric, and Joshua for having me here. What I want to do is to start from like some project that I done prior to talking about this game called Chamonix Sentinel, and eventually like show you how with my two colleagues we designed that game based on field research, the ethnographic approach we apply in anthropology, and how it lead to certain interesting kinds of lessons about what it means to rely on observing the world to design a game. So let's get started. So I mean, most of my work, I mean, in the last 20 years, most of my work was about things that I'm showing you here, about digital cultures. And I mean, it's sometimes it's in English, sometimes it's in French, but don't worry, I'm not gonna speak French. So it's most of my work, I would say till like the around like the mid 2010 was really about like digital cultures, how people use smartphones, the evolution of game controllers, smartphone repair cultures, etc., etc. I even wrote a book about 8-bit reggae music, this sort of sub-community of people playing reggae and dub with 8-bit consoles and Commodore 64 and stuff like that. So just to show you that I was really into that kind of like topic. And as an anthropologist working in an art and design school, I'm not necessarily interested in like the standard kind of research with very textual academic papers, but I'm interested in finding formats. Could be exhibits, could be books, could be websites that tries to play on different formats. Like for instance, did this book a few years ago about mobile phone repair shops, working with a designer colleague who's also an anthropologist, and we tried to mix different perspective, textual perspective, photography, the use of illustration drawn on during field research, the observation we made in repair shops. And the point of producing this kind of documents is not to produce articles and papers just for the sake of academic research and targeted at the academics, but the point is to have like a broader audience. To talk to, for instance, the participant in our research project, but also students in the context of design, engineering, art, architecture, social sciences, so that the findings could be relevant for this kind of audience who's trying to build an expertise about documenting the world, social scientists, or about changing the world, designers, engineers, or sometimes artists. So that's, I mean, just to give you a little bit of details about the kind of project that I'm doing. And I'd say that around 2015 or so, I became interested in environmental changes, not just because it was an interesting topic intellectually, but mostly because it became more and more important in our society, like the sort of dramatic changes of the environment because of like climate change, because of pollution, because of the degradation of the environment, was like a topic very important to me. And I started working on this with a first project that you can see here. It's a series of exhibits and a book called A Bestiary of the Anthropocene. And it's a project that I worked on with thisnovation.org, art collective based in Paris in France. And the point of this project was to start from an investigation that I was conducting at the time about how nature is becoming more and more hybrid between the natural and the artificial. Here, for instance, you have I mean, supposedly it's a tree, but it's a tree that grew up in one day, in one night in Cabo Verde. And it's typically the sort of new elements of of our environment that we can see nowadays. Like it's in between nature and the artificial. Here, it's obviously close to the artificial, but sometimes there are more natural elements that could exist. And we did the field research for a few years, like observing this kind of hybridization, and turned that into. I mean, we turned our notebooks. Typically, when you do field research as an anthropologist, you start taking notes about what you see, about the interview you make, about the documents you find. And we started documenting how, for instance, like the plants, like the trees or the animals or the geology is becoming more and more enmeshed with artificial elements. This is it's not a stone. It's a specific kind of accumulation of painting that create this sort of stone-like kind of structure. So we collected a lot of examples like that, and we turned that into a bestiary. I don't know if you're familiar with this notion of bestiary from in Europe in the Middle Ages. The bestiaries were documents that the monks and the clerics were producing to describe. At the time, there was no really science. There were different ways, different intellectual perspective on the environment, on the world. And bestiaries were a way to compile those documentation about animals, about plants, about stones, to document what they are. So we replicated somehow the logic of the bestiary to classify and describe those new sorts of entities, like the antenna trees, the trees that are actually used for as an infrastructure for mobile phones. And we created like this whole series of documents about this hybridization of nature and culture and technology, and asked a certain numbers of anthropologists, philosophers to react with different texts. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but the idea here was to show you that my interest about digital cultures tried to, to mesh somehow, to merge with my interest in nature and my first background, my origin background in natural sciences. So we were interested in putting on the same level things like Tamagotchis, for instance, with COVID-19 or with antenna trees or with radioactive mushrooms. All those things somehow, they can be perceived as some kind of hybridization or some kind of spectrum between the artificial, like Tamagotchis, and the natural, like human beings. We are natural, but our ways of existing has changed over time because of where we eat, because of food, because of pollution, etc., etc. So that's one of the projects that I did, another project that I did. And as you can see, my main interest as an anthropologist, and here I'm quoting a famous French anthropologist, my main interest is to find some kind of balance between documenting things by adopting a field research perspective and prototyping or using like ways of prototyping to represent or to analyze the sort of phenomena that I'm interested in. I'm sorry, the quote here, I think there was some problem with the some typos, but the whole point in this quote by Claude Lévi-Strauss is to say that even anthropologists, even the most abstract anthropologists like him, they at some point they had to take cardboard, paper, and strings and build some kind of model to analyze and to consider the phenomena they were interested in. And that's, as a person working on, for instance, books with comic books or a bestiary or a series of exhibits or prototypes like design fiction I'm going to show in a minute, that's typically the sort of ways of thinking that I'm adopting that is, I would say, different from if I were in a university. It's not that it's not possible to do that in a university, but being in a design school, in an art and design school, teaching to art and design students, talking to colleagues, I can have access to workshops about wood, about metal, about printing, about photography. All those things make me reconsider what it means to be an anthropologist in the same way that I reconsidered my way of being an anthropologist of technology by reconsider nature. So I try to combine all those different components in the project that I'm doing. And another sort of project that I'm doing, which are probably a bit different from anthropology and a bit closer to art and design, is my interest in design fiction. So this is a book we wrote with my colleague Julian Blicker, Nick Foster, and Fabien Girardin at the Near Future Laboratory. So for like 16 years at the Near Future Laboratory, we explored this notion of design fiction as a practice, and we wrote a book about it to reconsider what the lessons we could draw out of this project we've done since 2006. So quick definition about design fiction, and I think that's important for what I'm going to show you afterwards about the role-playing game. So design fiction, the term, it's a practice. It's a design practice, a creative practice that aims at producing tangible and very evocative prototypes, object that pretends or that do as if we were already in the future, already in the near future. And the point of producing those things is not to produce a science fiction movie or a science fiction TV series like Black Mirror, but the point of doing this is to have a certain kind of debate, certain kind of discussions about the consequences of some decisions we can take nowadays. And I'm going to show you this with an example in a few seconds. But design fiction is like as if you wanted to shoot a science fiction movie, but you don't do the movie, you just do the props, the things that make people understand that we are in the future. And you use those things to consider the problems, the issues, the topics that those changes could be technological changes, could be environmental changes, how those changes might have an influence on decision making of today. And this is typically the sort of approach we use with my colleagues with private organization or public organization. So in Felipe's introduction, he said that I'm not just working at Geneva University of Art and Design. I have a consultancy on the side, used to be with the Near Future Laboratory. Now it's a different entity. We call that Explorare, but the name was taken. So now the name is simply Girardin and Nova, the two partners. And what we're doing is simply to produce design fiction project for different clients to help them reconsider decisions about today. So let's take a quick example, a project we did for the state of Geneva in Switzerland. So the city of Geneva, the state, not the city, the state of Geneva was interested in self-driving vehicles. It was like a few years ago when there was some kind of big fuss about this sort of technology. And the Department of Mobility was, saw that there was something interesting with self-driving vehicles, but something that could be controversial for local people and local society. And they organize an event every year called Explore to think about the future of the urban environment. And for this, they asked us to create something. We were kind of free about that, to create something that could generate a debate, that could trigger some kind of debate about the desirability, the relevance of self-driving vehicles in the urban environment. So what we did was to create a very mundane, very basic object. We created a map, a foldable map that is actually a design fiction that represents what it would be like when you arrive at the airport or at the train station and you get a free ticket to access a self-driving shuttle or self-driving vehicle. You get this ticket with a barcode, you scan it on the car opens, and then you open the map, the foldable map, and that gives you some kind of understanding of what it means to be in Geneva in the future with the self-driving vehicles. You can see on the map that there are different elements that as changes in cities. You have streets in blue that are for optimized traffic, which means it's only for self-driving vehicles. You have streets in red, which could be both for self-driving vehicles and standard cars. There are elements with the yellow triangle that says that it's not going to work. It's an urban canyon, so the GPS system wouldn't work, so it's impossible to go there with a self-driving vehicle. There are different ingredients. I won't comment them all about what's a self-driving vehicle. It could be a shuttle, it could be a car, what's mixed traffic. I mean, a lot of details. There are ingredients about the future that tells you what to do if there's a problem with the self-driving vehicle. You can press an emergency button and in case of a physical or security threat or medical emergency, and the vehicle will stop. So all those elements that I'm describing here, and I'm going back to the main map, all those things, they are, you can see them as a very, very mundane and banal way of describing a certain kind of future in the context of Geneva, so that people in the festival could have a discussion, could have a debate about whether this kind of technology would be relevant for the context of their neighborhood, would be problematic, would be easy to deploy, etc., etc. So the point of the design fiction is to turn something quite abstract, like self-driving vehicles, or we worked on a project about AI in the context of sport, and make that accessible so that like the people who are supposedly interested or who might have a say on this kind of matter could understand the issues and the consequences of decision making. So for instance, what people think about when we say self-driving vehicles is often related to mobility, but it's often not related with energy. And in the context of current debate in Geneva and Switzerland about energy, we wanted to show somehow that on the map that thinking about self-driving vehicle should be connected to thinking about energy. So as usual in Switzerland, we vote every 3 months. So we took the standard kind of voting flyer and included that in the map about self-driving vehicle as a way to make people aware that they need to consider the relationship between this technology and the huge energy need it will create, and it might lead to a vote or poll about like reopening or opening new nuclear power stations. So this is just to show you one example of design fiction, and probably one last thing about design fiction that I should mention is that we're not predicting the future. What we're doing with this is just to, I mean, using this quote by the science fiction author William Gibson, we're considering the fact that the future is already present somehow in our environment, and it's not evenly distributed. So there are marginal signs of change that already exist. Self-driving vehicle design in a company or in a research laboratory, problems of a GPS system, energy demand, the size of streets of today. They won't change, obviously, in the next 20 years, especially in a city like Geneva. So we know that with the prototypes of self-driving vehicles that exist in lab, we know that in some of the streets, there won't be any kind of self-driving vehicle with the state of technology. We know that we could test prototypes of self-driving vehicle in research labs and notice people's reaction to automation. So we use all those different ingredients somehow to create the map that I've presented before. So to some extent, working on design fiction is about collecting different signals of change, different reports. I'm going to skip that. That's another project. But what we're doing is just to do research about desk research, finding documents about signals of change, lab reports, patents about technologies, combining that with an understanding of people and the way people use technologies nowadays, or how people live with environmental changes nowadays. And we select some of those changes, those signals of change. We choose a format, for instance, the map of self-driving vehicle in the future. And that's how we create scenarios. By using a specific kind of format and some signals of change, we create speculative scenarios that exist as artifacts. Like, for instance, a map for self-driving vehicle, a cereal box to present the food of the future, catalog. We work with IKEA on the catalog of the future, for instance. And all those things, there are design fictions that we use later on in the context of focus groups and workshops with the different persons we are targeting to discuss whether those scenarios are plausible, whether they are relevant, whether they should need some specific decision nowadays if we don't want to reach them, or if, on the opposite, we want to follow that kind of trajectory. So that's probably like a very long introduction to tell you more about the sort of approach that I have. They're generally like a field research part, observing people, observing technologies and changes, turning that into a description. That could be a book, The Bestiary of the Anthropocene, or the book about mobile phone repair cultures. And sometimes there's another level, which is about speculation, about using that material to create a series of design fiction to engage people with a debate about futures scenarios. So that's like the sort of frame that give you like the kind of research approach that I'm adopting. Now I'm going to move on to a research project about the Alps, about the Alpine environments, in which I use that kind of approach. So I started around 2014, 15, around the same time that I worked on the bestiary of the Anthropocene, from Geneva, where I live, which is like, it's in Switzerland, but it's really close to France and Italy. And I started like a 7 years research project about the Alps. I took the Alps as if it existed as a single country, as a single entity, which is not the case. But using that as a sort of a very, I mean, the sort of spine of the continental Europe was a way to me to define an area in which I can make different forays and visit for 7 years in France, Switzerland, Italy, Slovenia, Austria, Germany, and conduct different kind of field research approaches like interviews, observation, desk research with documents about environmental change, about the mutation of everyday cultures in the Alps, etc., etc. And doing this was about documenting the way glaciers are disappearing and people are trying to protect them with very basic kind of material. This is the Glacier du Rhône, a Rhône glacier in Switzerland. In the back, it's the glacier, super dirty, and at the front, on the front, you can see how the glacier is protected with this sort of material that degrades, and then you get some plastic that goes directly to the Mediterranean Sea. Documenting also new sorts of rituals. Every summer in northern Italy, in Slovenia and Austria, people make fires to protest against climate change. So there's a kind of ambivalence between the fact that the planet is getting warmer and using fire to show people on the other side of the mountains that we are in this together. There's also a lot of technological infrastructures that I documented. Sorry, this is an artificial lake because there's a dam, and on top of the lake, on top of this lake, you have solar panels. So it's a very, very, common and mundane example nowadays of how the Alps are turning into a huge solar power station, especially in northern Italy, a little bit less in Switzerland, a bit in France. So I was interested in changes in terms of environmental issues, technology, everyday rituals, the way elements of the past, like this kind of chalet, could be retrofitted with solar panels, how very, very basic ways of dealing with water in the past was now getting more and more attention. This is called a bis in French. It's a sort of a canal in the mountains that allows water from the glaciers and water from the different water sources to be, to be like collected and to reach certain fields and forests in valleys in Switzerland. And this, interestingly, was described at the beginning of the 20th century by anthropologists as a way to see what kind of social organization could emerge in between public institutions and private institutions to manage resources. And And Elinor Ostrom, one of the researchers who got the Nobel Prize of Economy, used that kind of research to describe this very important notion of common. A common is a resource that is commonly shared by a group of people and could be managed in different ways, and not necessarily with the the company like capitalism or state organization. There could be things that exist in between, and that's typical from the Alps. So I collected a lot of examples like that. Sorry if it's in French now, but I turned that kind of material into a book. Let me show you a book, Fragment of a Mountain in English, The Alps and Their Metamorphosis. So I turned that kind of material into, if you remember the first step of my diagram, field research and description, the first step, that's the description. It's a book that somehow sits in between anthropology and literature, that try to combine different fragments, different observations about all those ingredients that I presented before to brush some kind of portraits about the Alps nowadays, and how there's a huge mutation happening because of climate change, because of politics, because of problems regarding too many tourists in some areas, but also about some certain technologies and pollution. So that's sort of the first step. I'm going to skip that. And the next step is probably closer to your interest. If you remember my diagram, there was started with field research, then description, and then speculation. And in a lot of projects that I do in general, the speculation, I do that myself. Like the project about self-driving vehicles, I did that with my colleague Fabien Girardin and a designer called Israel Viadet. We worked on that together. But for a project about the future of the Alps, it's so broad and huge, and it's so important for people living in those areas, that I wanted to use a different mechanic, and not being the person who's trying to select some kind of signals of change and turn that into a design fiction to probe people about this future. I was more interested into something more participative, so that people could elaborate themselves a certain kind of vision about their future in the Alps. And this quote by the American anthropologist Donna Haraway in the book called Staying with the Trouble, this quote was sort of quite stimulating for us in thinking about the right format to create this participative sort of design fiction. So in this quote, she says that games and play, no, she doesn't use the term game, she said playing could be a way to sit outside the sort of the way the future is often dictated by either by capitalism, or by companies, or by private institutions, or even public institutions. So play could be a way to go beyond the sort of cliched representation about the future, and could make people trying to understand how to make their world more habitable. So that's with this in mind, and as usual in the context of academic research, I did that in the context of the Geneva University of Art and Design. I had to write like a thick grant report to ask for a research grant to work on that project. And I had to in this kind of grants, I don't know how familiar you are with grant writing, but we had to show the importance of our project in terms of research. So I had to write down like few research questions based on the existing literature and about design fictions or about games. So the first research question we were interested in is how a game about environmental change can allow people to consider or to anticipate new ways of living with the environmental crisis. And the second research question is how do games can be some kind of participative or performative design fiction. So if you remember when I showed the design fiction, my definition was saying that it's a design practice that aims at producing evocative and tangible representation of the future so that we can have a debate about it. So here, the question is how we turn or we add a certain kind of performative or certain kind of participation in design fiction. Obviously, I mean, one of the reasons, one of the motivation to use games about the Alps is that there's a long tradition about games in mountains. This is an exhibit or two catalogs of an exhibit from the Museum of Mountains in Torino in Italy, Le Montagne per Gioco, that like compile a lot of different games about the Alps, and they were mostly on mountains, and they were mostly focused on competition, about reaching the top of a summit. Very, I would say, like very kind of competitive or masculine kind of perspective about mountains. And we know with philosophy of nature and anthropology of nature, we know that this is, I mean, this sort of representation about people colonize space and how competition is problematic. We know that it's not the future. And if you want to help people reconsider what would be the state of the Alps and the ways of living in the future in these mountains, we need to find ways of engaging people in less competitive perspective. And another, I mean, another reference, which is also certainly problematic in terms of the way it's conceptualized in terms of game mechanics, was Dungeons and Dragons. But even if like Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing games of that era were kind of, I mean, as a very, I mean, very limited kind of perspective about play, and especially the first edition of D&D. And we were interested in role-playing games and tabletop role-playing game, as one can do with Dungeons and Dragons. We were interested in that in a sense that, as opposed to like some, like for instance, some video games or some board games, it's all about talking. It's all about having people being engaged in a certain kind of discussion that is managed by the game master. And by having this sort of discussion, by like playing a certain set of characters, people would create a narrative about what they're doing, about how they could exist in a fictional world. And that was quite interesting from my perspective, because role-playing games, they suggest a certain kind of perspective. Of course, here it suggests something with a very sexist cover and not necessarily interesting. I mean, for the Alps, it's not interesting, but the way the world is represented in a role-playing game manual, with a description of the background, the chronology, the different kind of participants, could be humans, could be non-humans, could be animals, could be, I mean, different sorts of creatures. The way it's described is suggestive enough to let people think about how they could exist in this world. And role-playing games, tabletop role-playing game manuals, I've always found them interesting because they could be used to play a game, but you could also just read them as some kind of experimental poetry or literature that engage you in thinking about alterity, about a world that is different. So I started working with two colleagues, Etienne Mineur and Sabrina Calvo. Etienne is a graphic designer and Sabrina is a word builder, and she's also a science fiction writer and game designer. And we started, looking at the material I collected with the field research that I presented before, reports about environmental issues, academic publications, foresight reports, interview with experts and local observation, etc., etc. We extracted this material, different ingredients that I noticed in field research about the Alps in general, and then we zoomed in on Chamonix because it's it's an Alpine town that is at the bottom. At the foot of the Mont Blanc, the highest peak in continental Europe, and Western Europe, and we thought it would be interesting to zoom in that area because it somehow encapsulates, or it combines a lot of different problems that we noticed in our field research and desk research about the Alps. Problems regarding too many tourists, problems regarding pollution, a lot of traffic because of a tunnel, problems regarding the way water and glaciers are melting, problems also because agriculture has been somehow left out because of different sort of industry and tourism, etc., etc. So we took that place as a sort of one place that somehow represents most of the problems one can find in the Alps in general. And then we started using these ingredients that I just mentioned to to design a game, to design a tabletop role-playing game that could engage people with issues regarding environmental crisis, problem with resources shortage, tensions related with different institutions, emancipation of social groups, presence of migrants. All those things exist in the Alps and could be present as a way to debate about the future of this area. So we started prototyping, and that's how we starting to live aside the research material and started to think about what would be proper game mechanics that could engage people with building together a narrative about the future of the Alps. And that's just to show you some pictures of how we started prototyping with pen and paper. We decided not to have a board. The game is played by, it's managed by a game master who take a sheet of paper, draw down the rivers of this valley, some very basic geological elements like that mountain, this forest, this glacier. And it's every player had to define a character. There's no character sheet as usual it's usual to have character sheets in role-playing games. Here we only ask people to write down 3 lines of text on a sheet of paper with their names, the sort of profession they have, and some character traits. No characteristics, no other characteristics, no numbers. Each scenario has a certain number of different professions, and the participant choose one of those profession and play this person. And we tried different boards, but we eventually left them out. And we thought it would be more interesting to have people, when playing the game, at each important step, they have to, the game master suggests that we write down a few lines of text on the map so that over time it creates some kind of narrative on the paper map with the different actions that the players have performed. As usual with tabletop role-playing games, it's important to have mechanics to test whether the actions could be done or not, because otherwise it's not really funny. If you say, yeah, I climb up this mountain, and you're sure to succeed, it's not very interesting. So for this, I was interested in finding a game mechanic to test people's action that could be tied in with existing practices with games in the Alps. And I found in folklore books this game called Jeu du Grelot, bell game, a game that existed in schools in the 19th century, where kids would one kid would take few little stones in nature, and would shake them and ask their friends to guess the number of stones the kid had in the hands. And we thought this would be interesting to replace dices. Instead of rolling a dice, we use that kind of mechanic where every time a player wants to do an action, like I want to climb down this part of the mountain, every time a player wants to do something like this, the game master takes a certain number of stones, shake his or her hands, and the player has to guess. And if it's the exact number, for instance, the game master had 5 stones and the player had, say, 5 stones, the action succeeds. And if the person says 2 stones and the game master had 5 stones, it's a total failure, and the consequences could be dramatic for the player. But if the person say 4 stones instead of 5, the game master can improvise and use this kind of margin of error as a way to, to define the success or not success of the action. So that's one game mechanic. Another game mechanic, as you can see here, you have like those little natural elements. Like each player has one, like this is the fruit of a pine tree. Every player has one and can use that to turn himself or herself into a non-human for 5 minutes. Could turn into a bird, into, I don't know, there are not many wolves, but there might be in the future, or turn himself or herself into the river. And then the person who used that kind of magical power, it's called syntopia in the game, the person who turned himself or herself into a bird cannot talk. They can just like fly around. They develop the agency of the non-human they incarnate, they embody. To some extent, it's a way to shift the player's perspective and force them to look at the world and the scenario with a non-human perspective. And they can, of course, they can mimic the way they act. They can say that orally, but they cannot talk. So that's they need to reconsider the way they could act for 5 minutes in the game. And as one last element of the game mechanic is to help I'll talk about scenarios in a minute, but to help the game master with specific encounters with people, animals, or situations. There are a lot of tables, numbered tables in the game manual. And the way it works, because we don't have dices, is that we ask the game master to use like, for instance, a glass with a little bit of water. The game master points the finger in the water and do this. It creates like little dots of water. And the number of dots you could read in the table to which encounters it corresponds to. Like, for instance, if there are 4 dots of water, it means that you may meet a very, very huge rabbit, mutant rabbit that can exist in 2088 in Chamonix. So we have those very, very basic ingredients of game mechanic. We created an adventure games that is quite similar to what you have in tabletop role-playing game, in which players start from a situation that the game master give them at the beginning. And they need to, I will give you some example afterwards, and they well, elaborate, they say what they're doing, they play the characters they created, and it lasts for, each scenario lasts approximately an hour and a half or 2 hours. And the point is not to engage into very long scenarios and role-playing game campaigns, because it would be a bit too hard especially for beginners. But the idea is to use that kind of game mechanic to play either exploratory scenarios or problem-solving scenarios that sits in between now or 2035 and the end of the century. For instance, there's one scenario in which the players are tasked to map out a trail that starts from Chamonix in France to Courmayeur in Italy that existed 1,000 years ago, before the Ice Age. And now that in the future that the glaciers are melting, the players are tasked to map and reconsider what would be the proper path to go from Chamonix to Courmayeur. And as you can see here, it's just an alibi, this kind of scenario. It's just an alibi to engage the player into a situation that is different from now, and to ask them to consider how things would change. So they have to move from one place to the next. And the scenarios in the manual gives secondary ingredients or some kind of elements, situation that will prevent them or facilitate their task to happen. Same with, there's a scenario about collapsing of the infrastructure at the top of Aiguille du Midi, which is a very, very small very, very narrow kind of mountain, Mont Blanc. And here the players have to do some kind of rescue mission for people sitting there with an accident. There's also another scenarios about scientific explorations. All the scenarios, there's just like starting points to engage people into a certain kind of context, obviously described by the game master based on the way he wrote the game manual, and use that to engage people into the sort of discussion that I mentioned about design fiction a few minutes ago. It's a way to engage them concretely in a world that they could think about, and in which they have to take certain kind of decisions about actions, about like being against or with some like persons they would meet during the scenario that the game manager will bring out. So with game manuals, that with tabletop role-playing games, the essence of the games lies in the game manual. So here you have the French version that describes the rules of the games, the background. It's a chronology that goes from the past around year 1000 to 100 years in the future, with historical elements in the past and fictional documents about what happened between now, 2024, and the end of the century. And then the players should stop at this part. Only the game master should read the part about the scenarios, so that he or she could engage the players into these different scenarios. At this point, the game is only in French. I'm looking for public money to turn that into English. If you read French, I'm not sure about that, but the PDF is available for free online. And I don't have time to mention that, but all the images that are based on generative AI produced based on historical photos and photos that I did in my field research. So we tried to combine fictional representations with AI techniques. That I'll talk about that probably later if I have time. I just wanted to conclude with sort of the lessons about what I just mentioned here. I mean, as you can tell, I mean, game design is not what I do on a regular basis. I used to work in the game industry. I did location-based games 15 years ago, but I got back to it with this project specifically because I found that tabletop role-playing games were an interesting format to document the way the Alps could be changing. So my point was to use field research, the interview and observation techniques that I use as an anthropologist, to craft certain details about world building, Chamonix in the future, about potential scenarios that could engage players into activities. I used field research to describe game mechanics, for instance, the way we tested actions with the little stones that directly come from the folkloric thing we noticed in field research. So that's a way I found some inspiration, but also constraints with my colleague in designing the games based on documents and field research. And the use of mythology and folklore about fantastic or fictional creatures, about having the right in the game to turn yourself into an animal or a gondola or a river. That, to me, was quite important for two reasons. The first reason, it was a way to engage people into a different perspective, a non-human perspective, even if it's still a human, that's for sure, but it forces people to reconsider the kind of lenses through which they see the world. So that's one reason to adopt this more than human approach. And the second reason is that we tend, especially in Europe, we tend to look into other cultures for animism, for thinking about the way other cultures could see living beings or cognitive entities in nature. But that's something in Europe we used to have somehow, and it's very present in folkloric tales, in mythology. And for us, using this game mechanic of turning yourself into an animal or non-human or fictional creature was a way to allude to or to suggest that we can rethink the way our historical perspective about the past, about animism, could be also part of a certain kind of future about especially about the environmental change. And it's funny. So as a game mechanic, it's a way to help the players of the tabletop role-playing game to help them reconsider the situation they're part of, which is often portrayed as dramatic, as very difficult to get out of. And using this kind of more than human approach was a way to shift the perspective and to help them consider that they might have a different, to shift their imagination somehow. So there I am with the talk part, and we can probably discuss now with Q&As.